Hey, good morning, everyone. Pat Lopez again. It is Wednesday, December 23rd, and I'm back with Dr. Amalinda Webb. Good morning, Amalinda. Um, and we're tackling the last of the initial wave of questions that we got from our Slack channel query. And again, this is less a question than a concern. And I know it's on the minds of a lot of people, and it's actually rolled into the other big concern that people have that Dr. Hoffman and I tackled in the last video. And essentially the concern is this development or this vaccine was developed so quickly. I'm really concerned that they cut corners in terms of safety. Completely legitimate concern, in my view, given that it takes, 10 to 15 years optimistically to develop most vaccines. So let me start with you. Do you share those concerns, Amalinda?
At first, I actually was a little bit concerned because there was so much political hubris that was tied up in the development. But it's been enough time, and I've had a chance to really look at the numbers and look at the science behind it. And it looks to me as though there were some possible risks that were taken early on, but with the information and the data and all the process that's gone on since then, they've met all of the safety benchmarks. They've done everything that they need to ensure that it's ready for worldwide rollout. And so, yeah, I'm not worried about it anymore.
All right. So when I think about that, and I kind of share your viewpoint because I remember back in March, even people were saying, optimistically, we're looking at 18 to 24 months before we have a vaccine. And here it is, the end of December, and we've got 1.5 million vaccines in people's arms already, as of this taping, which is pretty incredible. So when I thought about this, I kind of identified sort of three main reasons why, gosh, I'm not worried about it. And one is we didn't start from scratch, right? mRNA vaccines, which is, what's in the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines that are approved under emergency use in the United States right now, those have been in development for close to 20 years now.
Exactly. So
Um,
even though this is the very first time that it's been used for a human vaccine, it's not like it's brand new. They've been testing it. They've been looking into the information already.
Right. So in terms of the new technology, but also in terms of the actual pathogen, right?
Yeah.
I know that people have been working on vaccines against the other coronavirus, the other coronaviruses that have caused outbreaks. So the MERS outbreak that maybe a lot of people haven't heard of, but in 2012, the original SARS outbreak, it killed a lot of people in Asia in 2002. So again, almost 20 years worth of vaccine development and research. So we didn't start, from ground zero with vaccine development in March or February, whenever it was. I think the second reason is that it is definitely a question of economics and resources, right?
Oh,
So
yeah, definitely.
because this has caused such a worldwide disruption, we're throwing the kitchen sink at it in terms of resources. So,
Yeah.
a major lab that might have been working on the development of, say, an HIV vaccine, just pivoted. All of those labs pivoted, and all just kind of focused their eyeballs on that, and resources and money. Quite frankly,
Mhm.
this stuff doesn't take place for free. And then, the third reason, and this is a terrible paradox, but in terms of the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4 clinical trials and things like that, in terms of the process of checking for both the safety and the efficacy of the vaccine, to see whether it's effective, people have to be exposed to it. So,
Mhm.
in other words, the United States would not be a great place for clinical trials for, say, a malaria vaccine because we don't have malaria in the United States. right? Or even, some of the other viruses that we have concerns about, like, there was a huge concern over Zika a few years
Mhm.
ago. Well, that really affected a very small number of people in Florida, and we haven't seen it since then. So, but because unfortunately the pandemic has run rampant, we were able to get results on efficacy in the United States much quicker, right?
Mhm.
And so, do you want to talk maybe about some of the details of the
Yeah.
clinical trials?
Yeah. So, one of the biggest things that actually allowed the rapid development and production of the vaccines is the funding that went into it, not only from the pharmaceutical companies, but also from governments.
Right.
So, here in the US, they used Operation Warp Speed. There was a similar grant in Germany. So, that was actually what funded the Pfizer research, whereas Moderna had been falling more under some of the US funding that
Mhm.
helped with that. So that while these trials were going on to test the efficacy and the safety, they were already getting the infrastructure in place so that
Right.
they had it ready to go and roll out as soon as they got the go ahead on the safety.
Right.
Usually that waits until you're late in phase three. So that's actually about 6 years in. And instead, they started doing that as soon as they started the first
So,
trials.
actual production of the vaccine,
Not production of the vaccine, but preparation of uh, basically
large
what
scale
they would
type of?
need to be able to produce it. Because they
Oh,
didn't know that the vaccine itself was actually ready to go, but they were getting the infrastructure in there
so
and
ramping it up, just kind of
ramping it up.
thinking about it.
Yeah,
Okay.
making sure that they had the ingredients necessary, that they had the production line, that they were already starting to, like, the government was making contracts and saying we want X number of vaccines, even
Right.
though it's not even developed yet, even though it's not ready to roll out, but basically putting the money in there so that the companies had that capital to work with to be able to actually roll out
Right.
once they did have a product that was ready to go. So I just pulled up a screen,
Slide.
slide, sorry, from the World Health Organization that actually talks about vaccine development. So the traditional vaccine development that can take 10 to 15 to 20 years, this is kind of the general pattern. So they would go through the preclinical trials, which is using animal models instead of using people to test it. And then they go into a small phase one trial with human subjects, so very limited numbers. If that's positive, then they move on to phase two, which is slightly bigger, but it's more targeted in terms of who is actually recruited to participate in the phase two trial, specifically looking at people who are high risk. So, what's the population, what's the health, what's the demographics of the people who really need to be targeted with this vaccine, so that you're not just testing it in healthy subjects, that was phase one, but testing it in the people who need it.
Okay, that makes
And
sense.
so then once it passes those, that's about 5 years, then it would go into phase three, which is where they recruit tens of thousands of people and actually test it on a much larger scale. So that's why it would usually take so long. And previously, the fastest that any vaccine had been developed was the mumps vaccine, and it
Right.
took 4 years.
Mhm.
So because there was the economic incentive and the economic support, plus all of the research that had already been in place in terms of the SARS COVID virus and mRNA vaccines and everything like that, they were really ready to hit the ground running. And because it is a global problem, that's why there were so many minds and so much money put towards it. So they basically concurrently did the preclinical phase one and phase two. And that's where I said, like, there might have been a little extra risk for those phase one people because normally they wouldn't get recruited until the animal trials were complete.
Right.
But um, that was a managed risk. It wasn't like, oh, well, let's just try anything. They were actually, they had met the basic safety benchmarks. They just took a little extra risk management.
Mhm.
And then once they were getting good results back from that, then they went ahead and launched the phase three. So right now, the numbers that I heard were 70,000 people have been part of the phase 3 trial for the I want to say it's the Moderna. And with that, because the virus is so widespread, a lot of people got exposed. And out of that, very, very few actually got sick. And the
Right.
ones who had had the vaccine and actually did get sick had a much milder reaction.
Right.
So they were able to compare the placebo, the people who just got a shot of nothing, to the people who got the phase 3 trial vaccine.
Mhm.
And there was about 120 people who got sick with the placebo, and there was 6 for Pfizer and I think 11 for Moderna, and none of those cases were severe cases.
Right. Right.
So that that's where they actually got that 96%
Right, and I think we
efficacy.
were gonna make a separate video with
Okay,
numbers later on where we
I
delve
got
into
excited.
that a little bit more, to compare that. But, I love this graphic because when you look at the top graphic and you look at phase 3 and how it stretches out, over 3 years, but you look at phase 3 in this accelerated timeline and how it's compressed, and again, it is compressed because you're able to recruit so many people, right? It's our ability, like, of course, if it's already gone through phase 1 and phase 2, then it looks like it's working, then it's relatively easy to recruit, and get results from that. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, I mean, I think that does a good job of convincing me, at least, that this is both a safe and effective vaccine. So thanks, Amalinda. And I think that takes care of, like I said, the first wave of questions that we've gotten. And I think we're going to take a little break here for a couple of weeks, and we'll be back and see if folks have more questions that we can answer. It's going to take a while to get everyone vaccinated, get to that, holy grail of herd threshold, and folks will undoubtedly have more questions as we go along. So you take care and stay safe, and we'll talk to you folks soon.